I never imagined that loyalty could be a mask for such profound betrayal. My name is Ibrahim TRAORE, and what I discovered in the shadows of power, the secret plan of the President of Nigeria to ambush me, turned my life upside down, turning every step into an abyss of danger. Brace yourself, because this is the story of how the truth almost cost me everything. To make sure you don't miss any stories as unbelievable as this one, and to support our work to bring the truth to light, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. Your help is essential for us to continue revealing what few dare to tell. I felt a strange uneasiness in the air, a chilly sensation that permeated the corridors of the presidential palace. Despite the scorching heat of Abuja, it was as if the opulent walls were whispering secrets, uncomfortable truths that the sunlight stubbornly refused to reveal, and this premonition, almost a shiver down my spine, would not leave me for an instant. My responsibilities as the president's head of security were immense, but the weight of that distrust that was springing up in my chest seemed to transcend any protocol, any professional duty, suggesting that something much greater was at stake. Meetings with the president became briefer and more superficial. His eyes, once so open and trusting, now seemed to carry an opaque veil, an almost imperceptible distance that only the keen intuition of someone living on the edge of perception could capture. He avoided my direct gaze, he dodged my more incisive questions about the security of certain classified operations, and this subtle change in his demeanor set off a red light in my mind, transforming the routine into a minefield of uncertainty. The camaraderie we had built over years of loyal service seemed to vanish in the rarefied air of politics, replaced by a calculated coldness that left me on constant alert, with the feeling that I was watching a stranger in disguise. My team, though loyal and competent, did not realize the gravity of the atmosphere, the change in dynamics that was taking place between the president and me, but I, with years of experience in dealing with the nuances of threat, knew that the most dangerous of all betrayals did not manifest itself in explosions or gunshots, but in quiet whispers and evasive glances, planting the seeds of doubt where there had once been unshakable trust. The environment became a labyrinth of innuendo, where every smile seemed to conceal a hidden agenda, and every compliment a subtle trap, and I, a master in the art of observation, began to decipher the almost imperceptible signs. I began to notice small deviations in protocols, coded messages that I had previously received directly from the president now passed through intermediaries I barely knew, shadowy figures emerging from nowhere, carrying sealed documents with orders that seemed illogical or unnecessary to national security. They were tiny details, but for a man trained to see the invisible, each one of them was a piece in the puzzle of a plot that was beginning to take shape, slowly, macabrely. The communication network, once so transparent, now resembled a spider's web, with invisible threads connecting points that I could not identify, and the feeling of being excluded from the most intimate circles of decision-making became increasingly palpable. The loyalty of my men was unquestionable, but I knew that if betrayal came from the top, from the one we had sworn to protect, the entire structure could collapse in a matter of seconds, dragging us into an abyss of irreversible consequences, and this awareness pushed me to act with extreme caution, to observe every move with the precision of a predator, seeking the truth before it consumed us completely. The burden of protecting not only the president, but also the integrity of my subordinates, weighed heavily on my shoulders, and the possibility that the enemy was wearing the same uniform as us made the situation even more complex and dangerous. There was still no concrete evidence, just a series of disturbing clues, like breadcrumbs thrown on a dark path, that guided me towards a dark conclusion, towards the revelation of a secret that could shake the foundations of the nation and perhaps destroy everything I had built with so much sweat and dedication. Sleep became a luxury, replaced by sleepless nights, where every shadow on the wall seemed to hide a threat, and every silence was filled with the echo of unanswered questions, hammering in my mind like a war drum. My mind worked incessantly, like a computer processing data at dizzying speed, connecting the dots and searching for the logic behind the apparent chaos. The feeling of loneliness embraced me, for I knew that I could not share my suspicions with anyone, not before I had an unshakable certainty, for the accusation of treason, coming from a man like me, could unleash irreparable chaos and cost me my own life, or the lives of those who trusted me. The truth, in certain contexts, is a weapon as powerful as any projectile, capable of toppling empires and pulverizing reputations, and I needed to handle it with the delicacy of a surgeon and the cunning of a spy. The weight of secrecy was crushing, but the urgency of unraveling the secret plot drove me to endure the isolation, to delve into the depths of a solitary investigation. My eyes fixed on one particular member of the president's staff, a newly arrived aide whose behavior was overzealous, almost servile, and who always seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, listening in on conversations that didn't concern him and relaying information with a frightening, almost predatory speed. His previously discreet presence now stood out like a beacon in the fog, radiating an aura of artificiality that alerted me even more, turning him into a focal point of my growing distrust, and I knew that he was a fundamental piece in the puzzle that was beginning to be assembled. He was the cog that didn't fit perfectly in the mechanism, and his deviation, no matter how small, betrayed the presence of something dysfunctional. The night stretched out in silent vigils. I spent hours examining reports, cross-referencing data, reviewing security camera recordings, looking for any anomaly, any deviation that could confirm my suspicions, and my nerves were on edge, every sound amplified, every shadow taking on a life of its own, every breath becoming an act of war against sleep and sanity. Paranoia was a constant companion, but experience had taught me that, in our world, it was often a more reliable guide than blind faith, and I was determined to follow every one of its whispers, no matter where they led me, because instinct, in that situation, was my greatest ally. The hunt for the truth had begun, and I knew there would be no turning back, not until the veil of lies was torn completely, revealing the true face of the conspiracy that was taking shape in the shadows of power, threatening to swallow us all, and I was ready to face whatever came, to unravel every knot, every secret, whatever the cost. My honor and the security of the nation were at stake, and I, Ibrahim TRAORE, would not bow before the darkness, not before fighting with all my strength to protect those we swore to serve, whatever the cost. The break from routine by the aide, a meticulous man who followed schedules with robotic precision, was the first tangible sign, a deviation in behavior that set off an alarm in my mind, when he left the palace at an unusual time, heading to a peripheral area of the city, far from the usual itineraries of high-ranking officials, and this departure from predictability made me tighten my grip, because I knew that something extraordinary and possibly nefarious was happening. His abrupt departure, without prior warning and without apparent justification, was an anomaly in his pattern of behavior, and anomalies, in the world of security, are never coincidences. My surveillance team, the most discreet and trained I had, was immediately activated, following the advisor's vehicle with almost ghostly expertise, keeping a safe distance so as not to be detected, but close enough to capture every movement, every stop, every interaction he might have. The radio silence was tense, only brief and essential codes were exchanged, because with every second, with every curve in the road, the truth seemed to be getting closer, and I felt the adrenaline pulsing through my veins, like a mighty river about to overflow. The operation was extremely sensitive, and any mistake, no matter how small, could ruin everything. The advisor stopped in a middle-class neighborhood, in front of a modest house without any distinctive features, a place that was completely out of step with the standard of living and contacts one would expect from someone in his circle, a place that reeked of secrecy and dissimulation, and the contrast between the simplicity of the place and the complexity of his position raised red flags in my mind, because excessive discretion usually hides something, and that something is almost never good. The absence of any luxury or ostentation made the place even more suspicious, as if it were disguised so as not to arouse suspicion. He entered the house, and the lights quickly went out, creating an information vacuum that lasted for what seemed like hours, while my men held their position, invisible in the darkness, watching the silent facade of the residence with the patience of predators, waiting for their prey to reveal itself, and this waiting, this tension that built in the air, was almost unbearable, but essential to the success of the mission. Time dragged on, each minute turning into an eternity, but I knew that haste would be our worst enemy, and that calm was our greatest weapon. Suddenly, a silhouette appeared against the window, and the image, though blurred and distant, chilled my blood. It was the Minister of Defense, a man of immense power and influence, whose name should never have been associated with a clandestine meeting like that, much less with a low-ranking aide, and the sight of his face, even for an instant, confirmed my worst fears. adding a layer of complexity and danger to everything I suspected. The web of conspiracy was becoming wider and more frightening than I had imagined, involving figures I had considered unshakable. What would a defense minister be doing in such a discreet house, meeting with a seemingly insignificant aide, at such an unusual time, under the cover of darkness? The question echoed in my mind, demanding an answer I feared finding, and every fiber of my being screamed that this meeting was not a coincidence, but rather a crucial piece of a dark puzzle, perhaps the most important of all, that was beginning to reveal itself in all its magnitude. The possibilities were terrifying, and all pointed to betrayal on an unimaginable scale. My team managed to plant a highly sensitive listening device near the house, taking advantage of a brief moment of distraction in the neighborhood, and the audio stream, initially just white noise, began to take shape, transforming into whispered voices, fragments of conversations that, even if disconnected, carried a disturbing weight, an aura of evil, and I knew that I was on the verge of a discovery that would change the course of history, and my own life, forever. Each word captured, however incomplete, was a piece of a sinister mosaic, and the anxiety to decipher it was immense. The first fragments of dialogue I was able to decipher were about secret movements, elimination of obstacles, and the need to act before the next official announcement, words that, in isolation, could sound generic, but in the context of that secret meeting between such powerful figures, they formed a chilling picture, a canvas painted with the colors of betrayal and violence, and I felt the ground tremble beneath my feet. The chill in my spine was constant, and the gravity of the situation was revealed with each syllable, each sigh that I heard through the device. The voice of the Minister of Defense, unmistakable even in a whisper, explicitly mentioned my name, Ibrahim TRAORE, in a tone that was not one of praise or recognition, but rather of concern, of a problem to be solved, a piece to be removed from the board, and in that instant, the air seemed to freeze around me, and the truth, so feared, so visceral, exploded in my mind with the force of a lightning bolt, revealing that I was the target, and that the president, or at least his closest circle, was behind it all, plotting my downfall. The shock was overwhelming, and the confirmation that I was the center of the secret plan transformed my distrust into terror. The clue was concrete, undeniable, and terror mixed with anger as I processed the information that those to whom I had sworn loyalty, those whom I had protected with my own life, were now conspiring to destroy me, to ambush me, and the feeling of vulnerability, the betrayal that struck me in the depths of my soul, drove me to act, to fight for my survival and my honor, because from that moment on, I was no longer just the head of security, but a hunted man, with a deadly truth to reveal, and the search for justice became my only reason for existing. The weight of the revelation was crushing, and I knew that from that moment on, my life would never be the same. With the confirmation that my name was a target, every second became a relentless enemy, and paranoia, once a shadow, was now a constant companion, guiding each of my steps with the precision of a surgeon operating in a minefield. I knew I didn't have much time, and the need to deepen the investigation, to collect more irrefutable evidence, became my only obsession, the compass that guided my existence. Sleep was a luxury that I could no longer afford, and with every beat of my heart, I felt the urgency to unravel the plot that closed around me, like a deadly spider's web, while I became the center of a dangerous game of cat and mouse, where predator and prey were indistinguishable. My trusted team, though loyal and competent, was beyond the reach of my new reality, for I could not risk their lives by exposing them to a conspiracy that seemed to extend to the highest echelons of power, and the weight of loneliness, of the need to act alone, was overwhelming, crushing me under the burden of a truth that no one else could bear at that moment. I was the sole guardian of a secret capable of bringing down a government, and this responsibility propelled me down a path of no return, a labyrinth of dangers where every shadow hid a threat. With every step, with every decision, I felt the weight of an uncertain future, and the urgency of acting with extreme caution was my only guarantee of survival. My strategy changed dramatically. I became a ghost in the corridors I once commanded, a silent observer who moved in the shadows, paying attention to every word, every gesture, every deviation from routine, because I knew that the next clue could be the missing link that would connect all the pieces of the puzzle, revealing the full extent of the betrayal that was unfolding around me. I avoided direct gazes, kept my conversations superficial, trying to go unnoticed, an invisible soldier in the middle of a political battlefield. With every chance encounter, with every forced smile, I felt the poison of dissimulation spreading in the air, and I knew that I had to stay one step ahead, so as not to be the next victim. I drew on my oldest and most obscure contacts, those who operated on the fringes of the system, men and women who had access to privileged information but who would never directly compromise with power, and each of them became a precious source, a thread in an intricate web that I began to weave deep into the underworld, seeking to unravel the intricacies of the conspiracy that surrounded me. The information I gathered was fragmentary, like pieces of a mosaic that did not yet make sense, but each one was a vital piece in my desperate search for the truth. I delved deeper and deeper into a world of secrets and whispers, where trust was a luxury I could no longer afford. I had discovered that the defense minister had made a series of significant financial transfers to offshore accounts in recent months, amounts that far exceeded his declared income, and these movements, so subtle to the untrained eye, were to me a glaring sign of corruption, a trail of money that seemed to point to a much larger plan, an operation that required vast sums to be executed. Ambition, in our world, was a powerful engine, capable of corrupting the most upright, and greed, a poison that spread quickly, infecting everything it touched, and I was determined to follow this trail to the end. Money, I knew, was always one of the pillars of any conspiracy, and this clue was the beginning of a cascade of disturbing discoveries. My suspicions about the aide were confirmed when the tracking of his electronic devices revealed constant and encrypted communication with unknown numbers, some of them located in neighboring countries and others in remote regions of the country, which indicated a network of contacts that went far beyond his official duties, suggesting a web of intrigue that extended beyond Nigeria's borders. The scope of the conspiracy began to expand, revealing tentacles that I had not foreseen, and this breadth put me on high alert, because it meant that the dangers were much greater than I had imagined. Each new discovery added a layer of complexity and danger to the plot, making the situation even more delicate. An anonymous source, a former intelligence agent whom I had helped in the distant past, sent me an encrypted file containing details of secret meetings involving the defense minister and arms dealers from foreign countries, a meeting that seemed to be focused on the acquisition of state-of-the-art surveillance and interception equipment, but which, upon closer inspection, revealed a much more sinister purpose: the creation of an unprecedented control and monitoring capability, almost a surveillance machine capable of silencing any dissenting voice. The information was shocking, and the purpose behind this acquisition was undeniable. The gravity of the situation became palpable. They were building a structure to silence, to control, to eliminate any opposition, and I, Ibrahim Traore, had become the first major obstacle in their path, a target to be neutralized before I could expose the truth, and the awareness of this danger drove me to act with even greater urgency, to move like a ghost, avoiding any direct confrontation while I collected the irrefutable evidence. Each piece of information was a fragment of a deadly puzzle, and I was determined to put it together, whatever the cost. Every day, I felt closer to the truth, but also more exposed to imminent danger, and the race against time was real. With each piece of evidence collected, the president's name emerged more subtly but undeniably, between the lines, in the omissions, in the indirect orders that I began to decipher, like a ghost that haunts the actions of others, and the realization that the betrayal extended to the highest office in the nation was a heartbreaking blow, a wound to my soul, because I had dedicated my life to protecting this man, this institution, and now, the brutal truth was revealed before my eyes. The betrayal came from within, from the very heart of power, turning every certainty into doubt. The loyalty I had sworn was being tested in a way I could never have imagined, and the shock was immense, the betrayal was profound. The air around me seemed to grow thicker, charged with the promise of an imminent confrontation, and I knew that I could not retreat, I could not surrender, for truth was my only weapon, and justice my only goal, and I was ready to face the coming storm, to fight for my life and the soul of the nation, whatever the cost, for from that moment on, my mission was no longer just to unravel a plan, but to expose a betrayal that threatened to consume Nigeria, and I, Ibrahim Traore, would be the herald of that truth, even if it meant paying the highest price. The most shocking evidence came from an unexpected source, a former intelligence colleague, now retired and disillusioned with the system, who approached me secretly in a dark alley, his face etched with apprehension and his eyes bearing the weight of an unbearable secret, offering me a sealed envelope containing documents he had kept for years, waiting for the right moment to reveal them, and his voice, barely above a whisper, carried the urgency and fear of someone who knows that the truth can cost one's life. He was a man who knew the depths of corruption, and his appearance was a sign that I was on the right track. The envelope contained transcripts of encrypted phone conversations and emails that dated back months, before my suspicions had even begun to arise, and what they revealed was a meticulous plan to neutralize influential figures who might oppose certain political and economic decisions, a plan that listed names, strategies, and, to my horror, dates, some of which had already been executed under the guise of national security operations. The scope of the conspiracy was terrifying, and the ruthlessness of its methods even more so. Every line, every word, was a stab at my faith in the system I had sworn to protect. Among the names listed, mine was there, highlighted in red, with the annotation, High Priority, Operational Intelligence, which meant that I was not just an occasional target, but a significant obstacle to their plans, someone who needed to be removed urgently, and this visual confirmation of the danger that surrounded me chilled my blood, turning distrust into dread, and the feeling of being hunted was almost unbearable, but it drove me to act with even more determination. My elimination was a crucial step in their scheme, and this certainty made me see the plot with terrifying clarity. The shock came when I deciphered the origin of some of the most sensitive orders, those that seemed to come from a higher level of authority than the Minister of Defense, the initials of the President of Nigeria, discreetly inserted in internal codes, in apparently innocuous memoranda that circulated only among the most select circle of power, and this revelation, the undeniable proof of his direct participation in the conspiracy, hit me like a lightning bolt, tearing apart the last shred of loyalty that I still felt for him, turning everything to ashes, because the betrayal came from the very heart of power. The figure I had sworn to protect was, in fact, the architect of my own downfall. I remember how my hands shook as I held the documents, feeling the weight of that truth that shattered any illusion of integrity in the government, and the image of the president, once a symbol of authority and leadership, now disintegrated in my mind, revealing a dark, calculating face, capable of betraying his own allies to achieve his goals, no matter the cost. The disillusionment was deep, mixed with a cold anger that began to bubble in my chest, fueling the urgency to act. With each sentence read, with each line deciphered, I felt the structure of my reality crumbling, and the loyalty, previously unshakable, transformed into a burden of resentment. Even more disturbing was the discovery that the plan to ambush me, which I had already suspected, had a code name, Operation Eclipse, and the details that followed were nauseating, describing an ambush in a remote location during a routine security inspection that I was supposed to lead, a trap meticulously planned to look like a terrorist attack, an unfortunate accident, a clean and traceless elimination that ensured that I could not expose the truth, that my voice would be silenced forever. And the cruelty of the plot left me breathless. The chills in my spine were constant, and the certainty that death was lurking in such a heinous plan paralyzed me for a moment, before anger drove me on. The level of detail of the plan was terrifying, from the deactivation of my communications to the replacement of part of my security team with elements loyal to the conspiracy, all orchestrated to ensure that I was completely isolated at the time of the attack, with no chance of defense or calling for reinforcements, transforming what should have been a routine into a scenario of extermination. The betrayal was total, encompassing every aspect of my professional life, and the awareness that each of my movements had been monitored and anticipated by the conspirators was an even deeper blow, which made me feel like a puppet in their hands, without control. The date for Operation Eclipse was set for the following week, during a visit to a recently rehabilitated military base in the countryside, a strategic but also isolated location, perfect for an ambush scenario, and the proximity of the event forced me to act with a speed and precision that I had never experienced before, transforming me into a man in constant movement, with my life hanging by a thread, with my breath held, as each minute that passed brought me closer to the abyss, to orchestrated death, and I knew that time was running out, and the urgency to act was overwhelming, consuming every particle of my existence. The direct connection to the president was undeniable, proof that the conspiracy was not just a diversion by a few corrupt officials, but rather a decision made at the top, an order executed by the most powerful in the nation, and this revelation shook the foundations of my perception of loyalty, honor and duty, transforming everything into a barren landscape of disappointment. For the man I served with devotion was the same one who orchestrated my downfall, and the macabre irony of this situation crushed me, but also strengthened me, for the pain of betrayal fueled my determination to fight until the end. At that moment, as anger and pain mingled in my chest, I knew there was no turning back. I was a marked man, a target, and the only way to survive, to honor my life and the sacrifice of all who served this country loyally, was to expose the truth, no matter the cost, to confront the darkness that lurked at the heart of power, and to fight with all my might to unmask the president and his network of traitors. Because Nigeria deserved the truth, and I, Ibrahim Traore, would be the instrument of that revelation, even if it meant paying the highest price. The proximity of the date of Operation Eclipse forced me to make an immediate decision, brutal in its urgency. I needed to disappear, to evaporate before the ambush could be carried out, becoming a ghost to those who were hunting me, and my mind, previously bound by loyalty, now calculated each movement with the coldness of a war strategist, searching for an invisible escape route, a path that would take me away from the clutches of betrayal, without leaving any traces that could be followed. Because I knew that each second was precious, and that my life depended on an agility that would overcome the cunning of my enemies. My breath was short, but determination kept me standing. Escaping the palace, the epicenter of the conspiracy and the place I knew like the back of my hand, was a bitter irony and an immense challenge, as every camera, every guard, every corridor that I had designed for security, now became a potential trap, a watchful eye that could denounce my escape. I took advantage of the change of shift of the night guard, a blind spot in the system that I myself had identified years before, moving through the shadows with the precision of a feline, my heart beating wildly, while adrenaline propelled me towards freedom, towards survival, before the darkness of the night swallowed my steps and my hope. My first actions were crucial. I disabled my own tracking devices, changed my usual route out of the compound, using a rarely used service passage, and changed vehicles at a strategic point, throwing off any attempt to follow me, creating a series of false trails that would lead my pursuers into dead ends as I delved deeper into the shadows of the city. The need to become invisible was paramount, and each maneuver, each detour, was an act of resistance against the machinery of treachery that I was determined to dismantle, even if it meant living as a fugitive. For the first time in years, I felt completely vulnerable, without the shield of my position, without the protection of my team, a naked man before the immensity of a conspiracy that seemed to swallow me, but the urgency to expose the truth was a fire that burned me inside, stronger than any fear, and this flame gave me the strength to continue, to seek refuge in a place where I could plan my next steps with the necessary calm, away from the eyes and ears of the enemy, in a temporary sanctuary, where I could catch my breath before resuming the battle. I called an old comrade, a man of honor whom I knew would never betray me, a retired general who lived isolated on a small farm hundreds of miles from Abuja, his voice choked with urgency and danger, explaining only the essentials, the need for a safe haven, a place where I could organize and gather my forces before an inevitable confrontation. His response was immediate and unconditional, a relief in the midst of the maelstrom of dangers, and the mere mention of his name, his promise of help, was like a beacon in the midst of the storm, a reminder that loyalty, in its purest form, still existed somewhere. The trip to the farm was an odyssey of danger and paranoia. Every car on the road seemed like a threat, every stop for fuel an opportunity to be discovered, and I moved like a shadow, avoiding any unnecessary contact, with my face hidden under a cap and sunglasses, trying to blend in with the crowd, disappearing amid the flow of ordinary people, an invisible man in his own land, but with my mind on constant alert, processing every detail, every noise, every movement that could betray my presence, my escape, and the awareness of my invisibility, despite the danger, was a potent weapon. The general's farm was an oasis of simplicity and peace, surrounded by vast fields and a silence that, paradoxically, brought me a new layer of terror, because the stillness allowed my thoughts to become clearer, sharper, and the gravity of the situation to reveal itself in its entirety. There, far from the opulence and corruption of the capital, I could breathe, I could think, I could plan my revenge. But with every beat of my heart, I felt the weight of a nation at risk, and the urgency to act, even from temporary exile, was overwhelming, consuming every particle of my existence. The general, a man of few words but profound wisdom, offered me a safe haven and minimal resources, but enough for my survival and to begin my counteroffensive, and his presence, his unconditional support, was a balm for my wounded soul, a reminder that not all was lost, that honor still existed amidst the rot that was spreading through power. He didn't ask questions. He just looked me in the eyes with the understanding of someone who has already faced his own battles, and his silence was more comforting than any speech, a tacit promise of support. In the long sleepless nights on the farm, with the sound of crickets as my only company, I would mentally review every piece of information I had gathered, every shred of evidence, every name, every connection, searching for the flaw in the web of conspiracy, the weak point I could exploit to dismantle the president's plan, and with each passing hour, my resolve grew stronger, my anger turned into a sharp purpose, a weapon forged in the pain of betrayal, and I knew that I would not surrender. That I would not give up, not before exposing the truth, no matter the cost, because Nigeria deserved to know the truth. From that moment on, I was no longer just Ibrahim TRAORE, head of security, but a herald of truth, a lone warrior against an empire of lies, and my escape, although temporary, was only the prelude to a counterattack that would shake the foundations of power, revealing the hidden face of corruption and betrayal, and I was ready for battle, ready to sacrifice everything in the name of justice, because the nation cried out for a voice, and I, even in exile, would become that voice, whatever the cost, despite all odds. To expose the president and the defense minister irrefutably, the evidence I already had, although incriminating, needed to be amplified, connected to sources that could not be challenged or discredited by the government's disinformation apparatus, and the need to collect more concrete evidence, digital and financial trails that pointed directly to the involvement of the top of the hierarchy, became my new obsession, the compass that guided each of my movements, each of my thoughts. Transforming the temporary refuge into a secret headquarters. My vast network of contacts, built over decades of loyal and discreet service, began to be activated, each of my calls a cautious whisper, a coded request, for I knew that the slightest breach in security could compromise not only me, but also those who risked their lives to help me, and the risk was immense, but the urgency was greater, driving me to trust a few, loyal souls who still believed in justice, who still cared about the integrity of the country, and with each step, I felt the weight of the trust placed in me. The focus of my investigation turned to the financial records of shell companies linked to the defense minister, searching for unusual transfers that might signal payments for illicit services or the diversion of funds for Operation Eclipse, and each transaction, no matter how small, was a thread to be pulled, a clue to be followed, in the hope of unraveling the complex web of corruption that underpinned the conspiracy. And with each discovery, each number that aligned with my suspicions, the anger turned to an even colder, even more calculating determination. I knew that tracking communications was vital, so I focused on intercepting data from networks the government thought were secure, using reverse encryption software and social engineering techniques to gain access to servers and databases, searching for emails, text messages and recorded conversations that could prove the orchestration of the plan, and with each line of code deciphered, with each password cracked, I felt the adrenaline pumping through my veins, because I knew I was getting closer to the truth, even if it meant delving into the depths of a dark digital universe, where every click was a risk. I was able to access private flight logs and cargo manifests that revealed secret trips by the defense minister to countries with a history of black market arms sales, and the dates coincided with discussions about the acquisition of surveillance equipment, which confirmed the military nature of the conspiracy and the intention to use advanced technology to suppress opposition, to silence voices. And this discovery added a new layer of danger to the plot, revealing that the conspiracy was wider than I had imagined, and that the plan to ambush me was just a small part of a much larger scheme. A former intelligence analyst, now in exile and with whom I had been in occasional contact, gave me access to a database on a foreign security server where she had archived information about suspicious activities by Nigerian officials, and it was there that I found even more damning documents, non-disclosure agreements signed by the president himself, referring to classified security operations. And although the language was vague, the context, the dates, and the other documents I already had confirmed the president's direct connection to the plot, his active involvement in orchestrating my downfall and that of others. The evidence was piling up: bank statements from secret accounts with transfers to companies linked to the president's family, distorted but identifiable voice recordings with veiled instructions about cleansing and removing obstacles, and a constant stream of information about my whereabouts, or the assumption of where I was, which confirmed that the hunt was on and that they were closing in. And with each new piece of evidence, the weight of the truth became more crushing, but also my determination solidified, because I knew that I was on the right path to unmasking them. Each fragment of data I collected was like a piece of a macabre puzzle, and as the information fell into place, the picture of betrayal became frighteningly clear, revealing a complex web of corruption and power that stretched across the entire government, and the knowledge that I was risking my life to expose something so deep, so systemic, was a heavy burden, but also a source of strength. For I knew that my fight was bigger than my own survival. It was a fight for the soul of the nation, for the truth that needed to be revealed. The sleepless nights, the scarce food, the imminent danger, all became insignificant in the face of the magnitude of the truth I was accumulating, and I felt the urgency to act, to present the evidence to the world, before it was too late, before Operation Eclipse became just a pretext for an even greater cleansing, silencing forever those who might oppose his tyranny. My mission, now, was a race against time, and I was ready to face the consequences, ready to expose the truth, whatever the cost, because Nigeria deserved justice. My plan was now clear. I had the evidence, I had the conviction, and the only thing left for me to do was find the right time and place to drop my truth bomb, to expose the president and his accomplices, to fight for Nigeria's freedom, even if it meant my own death. The general watched me with a gleam in his eyes, knowing that my path was irreversible, and his tacit acceptance was an encouragement for me to continue, for I would not give up, for the light of truth, even in the midst of darkness, was the only hope for a better future. My only chance of survival and exposing the truth lay in taking the story outside the borders of Nigeria, to an international stage where the influence of the president would be mitigated and corruption could not be easily hushed up, and the need to find a credible channel, a powerful voice that could amplify my cry for justice, became my primary objective, the light at the end of the tunnel of darkness I was traveling through, for I knew that the local media was already compromised, stifled by censorship and intimidation, with no chance of making the truth echo. I needed a global megaphone. Remembering a European investigative newspaper, known for its courage and for exposing corruption schemes in authoritarian governments around the world, I outlined my strategy, looking for a contact who could be trusted and who had the capacity to give due visibility to my explosive material, and the memory of their previous reports, which shook the foundations of power in other nations, gave me the certainty that they would be the right allies in this unequal battle, the only ones capable of facing the power machine that was turning against me, without being intimidated, without bowing down, without being corrupted. The challenge was immense. How could I contact a high-profile international journalist without being intercepted, without leaving a digital trail that could be followed, without exposing myself and the general who was sheltering me to even greater danger? Every message, every call, had to be carefully encrypted, transmitted through secure and ephemeral networks, using methods that I had learned in years of counterintelligence, but which now turned against the very nation I had sworn to protect, in a bitter paradox that tormented me but did not stop me from moving forward, because the truth was my only banner. With the help of the general, who had some old but still functional radio communications equipment that could operate outside conventional networks, I managed to establish a connection with a contact in the digital underworld, an ethical hacker who had helped me in past operations, a man who understood the importance of privacy and information security, and with every beat of my heart, I felt the urgency to act, because I knew that time was running out, and that with every minute that passed, the chance of being discovered increased exponentially, putting at risk not only my life, but also the lives of those who trusted me. Through this contact, I sent a coded message to the newspaper's editorial office, containing only a fragment of the evidence, a teaser that would be enough to arouse interest, but that would not reveal the entirety of the plan, maintaining control of the information and ensuring my safety, and the wait for the response was excruciating, each minute feeling like an eternity, as I watched the horizon, waiting for a signal, a confirmation that my message had been received, that my voice had finally found a channel to echo, and I felt anxiety and hope mixing in my chest, in a tortuous dance, because I knew that my life depended on it. The reply arrived 3 days later, through the same secure channel, a short, cryptic email with an encrypted server address and a set of instructions for a secret meeting in a nearby coastal town, a neutral location, far from the direct influence of the Nigerian government. And this confirmation was a relief, a breath of hope in the midst of despair, because it meant that my message had been taken seriously, that the gravity of the situation had been understood, and that the possibility of exposing the truth was becoming increasingly real, despite the imminent dangers that lay in wait for me, and that I knew were approaching. I prepared all the documents and recordings, every digital and physical file that I had collected, duplicating and encrypting them on different devices, ensuring that even if one of them was compromised, the rest would remain safe, and the meticulous organization of this data was an act of resistance, a testament to my determination to expose the truth, to fight to the end, because I knew that this evidence was my only weapon against the power of the president and his network of traitors, and that the clarity and irrefutability of my evidence would be the key to the success of my mission, the guarantee that the truth would prevail, whatever the cost. The journey to the meeting point was another stage of disguises and countermeasures, avoiding airports and conventional routes, opting for small boats and back roads, blending in with the local fishermen and traders, a faceless man in a sea of unknown faces, with the goal of reaching the destination without being noticed, without arousing suspicion, and with each step, I felt the adrenaline pulsing through my veins, for I knew that danger was lurking, and that my life, and the lives of all those who supported me, depended on an agility that would overcome the cunning of my enemies, that would keep me always one step ahead, invisible, but determined. On the appointed day, in a discreet street cafe in a noisy and lively port city, I met the journalist, a woman with sharp eyes and a posture of someone who is not easily intimidated, who greeted me with an almost imperceptible nod, sitting down at the table as if she were waiting for a friend, and the silence between us was loaded with meaning, each of us assessing the other, understanding the immense risk we shared, and the exchange of glances was enough to seal a tacit pact of trust, an understanding that we were both there for a greater cause, and that the truth was the only bargaining chip that mattered. The conversation that followed lasted for hours, between sips of lukewarm coffee and furtive glances at the street, while I unloaded the torrent of information, presenting the evidence, the documents, the recordings, the web of corruption and betrayal that extended to the highest echelons of the Nigerian government, and the journalist, with impressive calm, absorbed every word, every detail, her eyes widening with the magnitude of the story I was revealing, a story that would shake the foundations of the nation and perhaps the continent, and I knew that this meeting, in that discreet place, was the beginning of a silent revolution, a time bomb waiting to explode. The meeting with the journalist was a turning point. From that moment on, the responsibility for exposing the truth was no longer just mine, but hers as well. The weight that had previously crushed me began to be shared, although the danger for me, Ibrahim Traore, was about to reach its peak, as I knew that publishing the report would be the trigger for a violent reaction by the government, a relentless hunt to silence me once and for all. With each passing minute, I felt the ground tremble beneath my feet, as the storm was gathering on the horizon, and I was at the center of it. My part in the revelation consisted of providing her with the entire arsenal of evidence, the complete narrative of events, the dates, the names, the financial and military connections that I had uncovered, and most importantly, the story of the plan to ambush me, which was irrefutable proof of the president's criminal intent, and with each file handed over, with each detail whispered, I felt the adrenaline pumping through my veins, because I knew that I was handing over the keys to the liberation of the truth, and that from that moment on, there was no turning back, and the only thing left for me to do was wait and prepare for the consequences. The journalist, with her team of editors and fact-checkers, worked tirelessly for days, checking every source, confirming every piece of information, preparing the report with a meticulousness that gave me the certainty that the truth would be presented irrefutably, leaving no room for doubt or misinformation. I watched her from a distance, through secure contacts, seeing the machinery of justice begin to turn, driven by the force of truth, and this vision, even if remote, brought me temporary relief, a feeling that all the risk and sacrifice would be worth it, despite everything. The decision of how and when to release the story was strategic. It would be published simultaneously on several international news platforms, including radio, television and online outlets, ensuring massive and instant distribution, making it difficult for the Nigerian government to censor or cover it up. The timing was crucial, a Saturday night, when the public would be most likely to absorb high-impact news. With every detail of the plan, I felt anxiety mixing with expectation, because the revelation was imminent, and the world was about to discover the truth. On the day of publication, I was isolated in a safe place, with the general at my side, both of us awaiting the moment with palpable tension, and the silence was interrupted only by the ticking of an old clock, which seemed to count the last seconds before the explosion of the truth, and my breath was suspended, my heart beating wildly, because I knew that my life, and the lives of many others, was about to change drastically, and that the final confrontation was approaching, and that there was no turning back, and the only thing left for me to do was prepare for the storm. At 7 o'clock sharp, the radio we had tuned to an international station began to broadcast the journalist's voice, with a grave and solemn tone, announcing the beginning of a bombshell report that would reveal a scheme of corruption and betrayal at the highest levels of the Nigerian government. Upon hearing the first words, the truth being spoken out loud to the world, a shiver ran down my spine, and a wave of relief and fear washed over me, for I knew that the point of no return had been crossed, and that from that moment on, my life would never be the same again. The report unfolded with surgical precision, detailing the president's plan to ambush me, Operation Eclipse, revealing the names of those involved, the financial transactions, the documents that proved each of my accusations, and the journalist's voice, calm but firm, narrated the plot with a clarity that left no room for doubt, unmasking the hidden face of power, and I felt the weight of each word, each piece of evidence, each proof that I had collected with such sacrifice, reverberating through the air, reaching millions of people, and I knew that the truth had been thrown to the wind, and that it could not be contained. The impact was immediate and overwhelming. Breaking news spread quickly through social media and other media outlets, shocking headlines graced the front pages of digital newspapers, and the name of the President and the Minister of Defense became synonymous with treason and corruption, generating a global uproar. The feeling that the world was finally seeing the truth was indescribable, a mixture of triumph and apprehension, because I knew that the revelation was just the beginning of a long and dangerous battle, and that the government's reaction would be brutal, relentless, and that I would need to be ready for it. The general looked at me with a restrained smile, a gleam in his eyes that reflected the satisfaction of a soldier who sees justice beginning to be served, and I felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion, but the adrenaline still ran through my veins, for I knew that my life was now in constant danger, and that the fight for truth was only just beginning, and that I would need all my strength to face what was to come, to survive the approaching storm, and to ensure that Nigeria could finally breathe the air of freedom, justice and truth, even if it meant paying the highest price. The great revelation had happened, and the game had changed drastically. I was no longer a man hunted in silence, but a voice that had echoed around the world, a catalyst for a revolution that was about to explode in the streets of Nigeria, and I knew that from that moment on, there would be no more hiding places, only the open fight against corruption and tyranny, a battle for the soul of the nation, and I, Ibrahim TRAORE, was ready to face it, whatever the cost, because truth was my only weapon, and justice, my only goal, and Nigeria was crying out for a voice, and I would become that voice, for the good of all. The publication of the report, like a seismic wave, swept across Nigeria and the international scene, and the government's reaction was exactly as I had predicted, a frenzied mix of furious denial and immediate retaliation, a desperate cry from a cornered power that saw its foundations crumble in real time, under the weight of the truth that I had exposed. And the president, in an emergency statement, his face contorted in barely concealed fury, tried to discredit everything, calling the story fantasies fabricated by enemies of the nation, an international conspiracy to destabilize the country. He accused me and the journalist of being mere pawns in a larger game, seeking to distort reality. The state propaganda machine went into action with terrifying efficiency, flooding all media platforms with disinformation, trying to paint me, Ibrahim Traore, as a traitor, a spy in the service of foreign powers, a terrorist seeking to sow chaos and discord, and every radio station, every television channel under government control, incessantly repeated the official narrative, seeking to suffocate the truth under a cloak of lies, trying to manipulate public opinion, turning me into a public enemy, a pariah, in his own land, without even giving me the right to defend myself, to respond. The Minister of Defense, in a fiery speech full of veiled threats, openly declared that I would be hunted down and brought to justice for my crimes against the state, and an arrest warrant was issued against me within hours, with charges of treason, espionage and insurrection, which in effect meant a veiled death sentence, an authorization to eliminate me without question, and I knew that from that moment on, Nigeria, the country I loved and served with honor, had become a hunting ground, and I, the prey, a lone man against the overwhelming force of an empire. The manhunt intensified dramatically, with the mobilization of special forces, intelligence units and even paramilitaries loyal to the president, all with orders to find me, dead or alive, and every potential hiding place, every contact I had had in the past, was being investigated and monitored, turning every shadow into a potential enemy, every sound into a warning, and the pressure was overwhelming. But my determination to survive and continue to fight for the truth, to expose the president and his accomplices, was even greater, despite everything. In the presidential palace, rumors of internal purges began to circulate, with officials and aides considered unfaithful or potential risks being removed from their positions, some disappearing without a trace, which confirmed the president's paranoia and his thirst for control, his willingness to eliminate anyone who might pose a threat to his power. And this escalation of violence and intimidation demonstrated how desperate he was to maintain control of the narrative, to stifle any trace of dissent, to impose silence, whatever the cost, even with the blood of his own allies. The borders were sealed, the ports and airports were placed under maximum surveillance, and my image, with the word "Wanted" stamped in bold letters, was plastered all over the country, making every step a race against time, every movement a calculated risk, and I knew that Nigeria was becoming a prison for me, and that my only chance of survival was to remain invisible, a ghost in the midst of the turmoil, while the noose tightened around me, with the knowledge that with every passing minute, the danger became more imminent, more palpable. The president, in his desperate attempt to reassert his authority, made a series of public appearances, fiery speeches in which he swore loyalty to the people and condemned the traitors of the country, but his eyes, once firm, now showed a gleam of desperation and fear, revealing the fragility of his position, the truth behind his words, and this vulnerability, although subtle, was a sign that the report had hit him at his weakest point, shaking his image as an unshakable leader, and with each appearance, I felt that he was losing control of the situation, that his mask was falling before the eyes of the world. The international community, initially shocked, began issuing statements of concern, with some countries calling for an independent investigation into the allegations of corruption and treason, which added a layer of pressure on the Nigerian government, and this external attention was vital to my survival as it ensured that the world was watching, that the truth, once exposed, could not simply be swept under the carpet, and that my struggle would not be in vain, and I knew that this intervention was crucial to my safety and the future of the nation. The feeling of being a hunted man was constant, a shadow that followed me at every step, but the fire of anger and determination in my chest was stronger than any fear, and I knew that I would not surrender, I would not bow down, not before I saw justice done, not before I exposed the truth in full, because Nigeria deserved better, the people deserved the truth, and I, Ibrahim Traore, would be the instrument of that revelation, whatever the cost, despite all the odds, and the fight for justice was my only purpose, my only reason for being. Operation Eclipse, which was supposed to be my end, had become the catalyst for a revolution, and I, the target, had become a symbol, a herald of truth, and the war against corruption and treason was just beginning, and I, Ibrahim Traore, was ready to face it, to fight with all my strength, to survive and ensure that the truth prevailed, even if it meant paying the highest price, because Nigeria was crying out for a voice. And I, even in exile, would become that voice, for the good of all. For the future of the nation. Contrary to the government's ferocious propaganda machine, the truth, like a mighty river bursting its dams, began to overflow, flooding the streets and the minds of Nigerian citizens, and popular support, initially a whisper, turned into a thunderous clamor, a wave of indignation that spread throughout the country, because the official narrative, so flawed and contradictory, could not withstand the irrefutable force of the evidence I had exposed, and the people, thirsting for justice, were ready to rise up, to fight for a future free from the corruption that had oppressed them for so long, despite everything. Social media, once a space of distraction, became the epicenter of resistance, a megaphone for the truth, with thousands of Nigerians sharing the news report, videos of spontaneous protests, and messages of support for me, Ibrahim Traore, transforming me into a symbol of hope, of resistance against tyranny. And this avalanche of support, which reached me even in my hiding place, was like a balm to my wounded soul, a reminder that I was not alone, that my struggle was also the struggle of millions, and that the voice of the people, once united, was an unstoppable force, capable of toppling empires. Within a few days, demonstrations broke out in the country's main cities, with hundreds of thousands of people taking to the streets, demanding the president's resignation and the investigation of those involved in the conspiracy. The police, although loyal to the government, were hesitant to repress the population with the violence I was familiar with, because the magnitude of the protests, the popular fury, made them wary, knowing that the indignation was genuine, and that with each blow, with each repression, the flame of revolt would ignite even brighter, propelling everyone towards freedom. International human rights organizations and democracy monitoring groups issued strong press releases condemning the persecution of me and demanding the protection of press freedom in Nigeria, which added a layer of diplomatic pressure on the government, and this global attention was crucial to ensuring that the fight for truth was not silenced, that the eyes of the world were on Nigeria, and that the voice of the people could finally be heard, without fear of retaliation, without fear of being suppressed. I, Ibrahim Traore, who had once been a guardian of security, an invisible man in the shadows of power, was now a fugitive, a hunted man, but also a symbol of resistance, a figure who, even from a distance, inspired hope and courage. And this transformation, from a figure of authority to a reluctant hero, was a heavy burden, but also a source of strength, for I knew that my voice now carried the weight of a nation, the cry for justice, and that I had to rise to this challenge, no matter the cost, no matter the danger. Messages of support, some encrypted and sent through secure channels, others simply going viral on social media, reached me, from ordinary citizens, from former colleagues, from soldiers I had trained and who still believed in my honor, and each one of them was a breath of life, a reminder that faith in justice still existed, and that Nigeria deserved the truth, and these expressions of affection and trust fueled my determination, transforming the loneliness of exile into a collective purpose. A fight that was not just mine, but everyone's, for the good of all. The government, in its desperate attempt to stifle the protests, tried to cut off access to the internet and social media, but the resilience of the people, the cunning of activists and ethical hackers, and the spread of alternative communication technologies, ensured that information continued to flow, that the truth was not contained, and with each attempt at censorship, the people became more engaged, more determined to fight, to demonstrate, to demand the resignation of a president who had betrayed the trust of his own nation, who had plotted against his own citizens, and against me. The journalist, in constant and secure contact with me, continued to release new information, new documents that I had provided, fueling popular outrage and keeping the story alive in the international media, ensuring that the focus remained on the president's corruption and betrayal, and her courage, her determination not to bow to pressure, was a source of inspiration, a reminder that a free press, when it acts with integrity, is a fundamental pillar of democracy, a force capable of unmasking the darkness and bringing the light of truth, whatever the cost. The general, with his wisdom and experience, helped me navigate this new scenario, analyzing the trends of the protests, the government's reactions, the mood of the population, and planning the next steps of our counteroffensive, because we knew that popular support was a powerful force, but also volatile, and that it was necessary to channel it intelligently, with strategy, to ensure that the revolt would transform into real change, into justice that would not only be for me, but for all of Nigeria, for the future of the nation. The truth, once released, could no longer be contained. It spread like wildfire, burning away the lies and masks of corruption, and I, Ibrahim Traore, even in exile, felt the strength of this movement, the energy of the people who rose up in my name, for the good of Nigeria, and I knew that the battle was far from over, but the certainty that the truth would prevail, despite all the dangers and sacrifices, drove me to continue, to fight, to not give up, because freedom and justice were the only way, the only hope for the future of the nation, for the future of all. The wave of street protests, combined with the global repercussions of the report, threw the Nigerian government into a whirlwind of unprecedented political crisis, an earthquake that shook the foundations of power, previously unshakable, and instability became palpable, with rumors of dissent within the governing party itself and the growing concern of foreign investors, who began to withdraw their capital from the country, fearing the economic and social collapse that was approaching. And the president, previously so secure in his throne, now found himself isolated, cornered, without knowing how to contain the rising tide of popular indignation that was spreading. International pressure intensified dramatically, with calls for an independent investigation into the allegations of corruption and abuse of power coming from Western powers and multilateral organizations, and the threat of economic sanctions, once a remote possibility, became an imminent reality, hanging like a sword over the regime's head, forcing the president to reassess his tactics, as the cost of suppressing the truth was becoming exorbitant, and the world watched every move, every misstep, with a scrutiny he could never have imagined, making the situation even more delicate and dangerous. The Minister of Defense, once so arrogant and imposing, now seemed like a man cornered, his previously impassive face showing visible signs of exhaustion and nervousness, and his public appearances became increasingly rare, his statements more restrained, revealing the fragility of his position, the perception that the web of lies was unraveling, and that his downfall was only a matter of time, and I, Ibrahim Traore, felt a bitter satisfaction in seeing justice approaching, even if from a distance, knowing that each of his gestures was a sign of desperation, of a lost battle. The task force assembled to hunt me down, once relentless, began to show signs of disarticulation and demoralization, with reports of desertions and officers refusing to carry out orders deemed illegal or unethical, and this fragmentation within the security apparatus itself was a clear sign that loyalty to the president was disintegrating, that faith in the regime had been eroded by the truth I had exposed, and that fear, once an instrument of control, was now turned against those who wielded it, making them vulnerable and exposed. The president tried one last desperate maneuver. He offered me a general amnesty in exchange for silence, a proposal that reached me through secret channels, but which I, with the dignity of one who fights for the truth, vehemently rejected, because I knew that my silence would be the silence of millions, the smothering of a truth that needed to be heard, and my refusal was a direct blow to his authority, a reminder that my fight was not for personal gain, but for justice, for honor, for the soul of Nigeria, and that there was no price for my voice. The local media, once controlled by the government, began to show cracks in its narrative, with some courageous journalists, inspired by international reporting, risking their careers to publish stories that, although subtle, challenged the official version and gave a voice to the protesters. This break in the monopoly of information was vital, as it allowed more people to access the truth, more Nigerians to join the fight for justice, transforming the press into an unexpected ally, a new front in the battle against the tyranny and corruption that had hunted me. The presidential palace, once a symbol of power and opulence, had become a besieged fortress, with the president isolated in his quarters, consulting only with his closest circle of advisors, and paranoia was setting in, with widespread distrust among members of the government itself, fearing internal betrayals and the imminent fall of the regime, and I, Ibrahim Traore, watched from a distance, through my contacts, the deterioration of a power that I had once sworn to protect, feeling the weight of an era coming to an end, and the urgency of a new era, which should be built on the basis of truth and justice. International public opinion was solidifying against the president, with world leaders issuing increasingly harsh statements, and diplomatic pressure was intensifying, with the threat of cutting off relations and the imposition of an economic embargo becoming a real possibility, and this union of voices from around the world was a clear sign that Nigeria was not alone in its struggle, and that the global community was paying attention, and that the truth had finally gained the support it needed to prevail, to unmask the darkness that nestled at the heart of power. The protests, despite the repression, only grew, with the population demanding not only the president's resignation, but also profound reforms in the institutions, an end to endemic corruption and the establishment of a new era of transparency and accountability. I, Ibrahim Traoré, felt the strength of this movement, the energy of the people who rose up in my name, for the good of Nigeria, and I knew that the battle was far from over, but the certainty that the truth would prevail, despite all the dangers and sacrifices, drove me to continue, to fight, to not give up, because freedom and justice were the only way. The noose was closing in, and the once powerful president now found himself without options, cornered by the truth I had exposed, by international pressure and by the outrage of his own people, and I, Ibrahim Traoré, knew that the climax was near, that Nigeria was on the brink of a historic transformation, and that my struggle, solitary at first, had become the catalyst for a revolution that would change the destiny of the nation forever, and I was ready to bear witness, and to continue fighting, whatever the cost, for truth and justice, until my last breath. The unbearable pressure, coming from all sides, the people in the streets, the international community, and even the silent defection of some of his own allies, finally broke the president's resistance, and the news of his resignation, delivered by a spokesman with a choked voice and a pale face, shocked the country, but brought with it a mixture of relief and euphoria that spread through the streets of Nigeria like wildfire, igniting the hope of a new future, and I, Ibrahim Traoré, received the news in my hiding place, feeling a wave of exhaustion and triumph, for I knew that the first step towards justice had been taken. The announcement was made in a tense early morning, with the president claiming health reasons, and the need to pacify the nation, a lame excuse to mask the truth of his defeat, of his inability to control the storm that he himself had created, and his escape, almost a hasty retreat under the cover of darkness, was the silent confession of his guilt, the tacit admission that the truth, no matter how much he tried to stifle it, had prevailed, and that his reign of corruption and treason had come to an ignominious end, despite all his attempts to remain in power. Amid the chaos of the transition, the Minister of Defense, realizing that the situation was becoming unsustainable and fearing that he would be the next to fall, attempted a desperate escape, seeking asylum in a foreign embassy, but his attempt was thwarted by military personnel loyal to opposing factions within the armed forces, who had already been organizing against the corrupt leadership, and his arrest, broadcast live by independent channels, was a spectacle of public humiliation, a visual reminder that power, when exercised with treachery, can turn against its own architects, dragging them into the abyss, into public ignominy. With the resignation of the president and the arrest of the Minister of Defense, Operation Eclipse was officially dismantled, and all those directly involved in the plan to ambush me were arrested and taken in for questioning, revealing the darkest details of the plot, the orders I had intercepted, the financial movements, the methods that would be used to silence me, and with each confession, with each new revelation, I felt a mixture of anger and relief, because the truth was finally being completely revealed, and justice was finally beginning to prevail. The streets of Nigeria exploded in celebration, with people dancing, singing and raising flags, with the hope of a new beginning, of an era of transparency and accountability, and the image of Ibrahim Traoré, the man who had unmasked the president, was sung and celebrated on every street corner, transforming me into an unlikely hero, a symbol of resistance and courage. And this outpouring of affection and gratitude was the most valuable reward for all the risks and sacrifices I had faced, for all the pain and loneliness I had endured in the name of truth, of justice. The international community applauded the peaceful transition of power and offered to help stabilize the country and conduct new elections, and Nigeria, which had previously been isolated and under threat of sanctions, was now seen as an example of democratic resilience, a country that had fought corruption and emerged stronger, more united, and I, Ibrahim Traore, felt the weight of this responsibility, but also the hope that my struggle could inspire others to stand up against tyranny, to defend the truth, whatever the cost. The general, my faithful companion in exile, looked at me with pride and a smile that said more than 1,000 words, and together, we watched the news, the euphoria of the people, the promises of a better future, and at that moment, the feeling of mission accomplished was overwhelming, a peace that only those who fight for justice can experience, and I knew that my life, previously a burden of secrets and dangers, was now opening up to a new purpose, a new chance to serve my nation, in a different way, but with the same passion and dedication as always. I, Ibrahim Traore, who had been hunted, vilified and declared an enemy of the state, was now a free man, with my honor restored, and Nigeria, the country I loved, was on the path to redemption, to healing its deepest wounds, and the macabre irony of my situation, of a man who had been betrayed by power and who had ended up overthrowing it, was a testament to the strength of truth, the resilience of the human spirit, and the certainty that justice, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way, always prevails, against all odds, against all darkness. The world was watching, and the story of my struggle, the story of how one man alone exposed a corrupt president and his secret plan to silence him, became an example, an inspiration to all those who feel powerless in the face of tyranny, a reminder that the voice of truth, when used with courage and determination, can shake the foundations of any empire, and that freedom, when won with sacrifice, is a priceless asset, a treasure that must be protected, at all costs, for future generations, for the future of the nation. The resignation of the president and the fall of the Minister of Defense were only the beginning of an even longer journey, the rebuilding of a nation, the healing of deep wounds, but I, Ibrahim Traore, was ready for this challenge, ready to continue fighting for justice, for transparency, for the future of Nigeria, because I knew that my voice now had the power to inspire, to transform, and that the truth had finally been set free, and that my purpose was, and always would be, to defend the honor and integrity of a people who deserved, above all, freedom and justice, no matter what. Despite the resignation and the arrests, the wound of betrayal in the heart of Nigeria was still open, bleeding the wounds of years of corruption and abuse of power, and the process of healing, of rebuilding a torn country, was a long and arduous path, full of challenges that demanded more than I had imagined, more than the simple exposure of a plot, because true justice was not limited to the downfall of a leader, but rather to redefining the foundations of a nation, to ensuring that the truth would finally prevail, and that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated, whatever the cost. The trials of those involved in Operation Eclipse and other corruption schemes revealed by my evidence became the focus of national and international attention, and the justice system, under new leadership and with the pressure of public opinion, began to work more transparently, exposing the extent of the rot that had nested in the government, revealing the complex web of embezzlement, bribery, and abuse of power that had drained the country's resources and eroded the people's trust, and I, Ibrahim Traore, witnessed each session, feeling the weight of each revelation, and the relief that justice, in its purest essence, was beginning to manifest itself. The deposed president and the defense minister, once untouchable figures, now faced the charges with drawn faces, their defenses crumbling under the crushing weight of the irrefutable evidence I had collected, and their testimonies, often contradictory and full of evasions, only reinforced the public perception of their guilt, of their betrayal of the Nigerian people, and I watched the downfall of those who had hunted me, and I felt a mixture of relief and sadness, for I knew that their disgrace was a reminder of the fragility of power, when not anchored in truth and honor, a path of no return. The journalist, my courageous ally, continued to publish investigative stories, delving into the unfolding of the trials and exposing new layers of corruption, ensuring that the truth remained the center of attention, and her voice, her determination not to allow history to be forgotten or distorted, was a fundamental pillar in building a new Nigeria, a more transparent and accountable nation, and I felt gratitude for her bravery, for her unwavering partnership, because I knew that, without her, My voice would not have achieved the resonance necessary to bring about the change that took place. Institutional reforms became a priority for the transitional government, with the creation of more independent anti-corruption bodies, the strengthening of audit agencies and the implementation of laws that promoted transparency and accountability. These steps, though initial, were essential to restore public confidence in institutions, to ensure that the foundations of democracy were rebuilt on solid foundations, on the rock of truth and justice, so that Nigeria could finally flourish to its full potential, free from the shackles of corruption. My own position, once that of a fugitive, had now been transformed. I was a key advisor to the new authorities, a man of experience and integrity who helped shape security and anti-corruption strategies, and this new role, though different from my previous life, brought me a new purpose, a chance to contribute to building a better future, a Nigeria where betrayal and injustice had no place. And I was grateful for this opportunity, the chance to redeem the nation, to protect those who could not protect themselves. With each advance in the trials, with each step in the reconstruction, the Nigerian people felt the taste of justice, the hope of a more just future, and the wounds of the past, although deep, began to heal, revealing the resilience of a nation that had risen against the darkness and emerged stronger, more united, and I, Ibrahim Traore, observed this transformation, feeling the weight of history on my shoulders, but also the lightness of a heart that had fought and won, that had contributed to a legacy of truth and justice. Nigeria, once mired in the shadow of corruption, began to shine with a new light, an example to the continent and to the world, that the fight for truth is always worthwhile, even if the price is high, even if the path is arduous, and I knew that my story, the story of Ibrahim Traore, the man who unmasked a president and his secret plan, would be told and retold for generations, an eternal reminder that integrity, courage and loyalty, when combined with truth, can topple the most powerful empires, can transform the most profound betrayal into victory. The general, my mentor and confidant, watched me with an approving smile, knowing that I had found my true purpose, my true calling, and his presence, his unconditional support, was a constant reminder that, even in the shadows, loyalty and honor still existed, and that true strength did not reside in power, but in integrity of character, in the unwavering search for truth, and this certainty was my greatest legacy, my greatest comfort, the guarantee that my struggle, my voice, would not be in vain, but rather an echo for eternity, a beacon of hope. The healing of Nigeria was not just a political or judicial process, but a journey of spiritual renewal, a reconnection with the deepest values of its culture and its people, and I, Ibrahim Traore, felt the joy of being part of this transformation, of seeing the nation I loved emerge from the ashes, stronger, more united, and more just, and I knew that, even with all the scars, Nigeria was ready for a new chapter, a chapter where truth, justice, and freedom would be the pillars of a great future, despite all the odds, and that is why I had fought, that is why I had won, that is why I had survived. The years that followed the revelation were years of intense activity, marked by my tireless dedication to rebuilding the integrity of Nigerian institutions, a mission that became the new purpose of my life, a beacon to guide every step, every decision, because I, Ibrahim Traore, would not be content with merely overthrowing a corrupt regime, but I tirelessly sought to build a future where the shadow of betrayal could never again fall upon the nation. Each day, I felt the weight and the honor of being part of this transformation. With the experience of living in the shadows of corruption and conspiracy, I became a respected advisor, working on national security reform projects, strengthening intelligence and ensuring that new protocols were impervious to infiltration and manipulation, and that every policy implemented, every training conducted, was an act of vigilance, a promise that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated, that Nigeria would be protected from the internal threats that once nearly destroyed it, and that honor would ultimately be restored, against all odds. My voice, which was once whispered in the shadows, now echoed in national and international forums, sharing my story, warning about the dangers of corruption and the importance of press freedom, and each lecture, each interview, was an opportunity to sow awareness, to inspire others to fight for their own countries, to stand up against tyranny, transforming my experience into a legacy of resistance, into a message of hope that would transcend the borders of Nigeria, reaching hearts and minds. Across the world, a call to action. The journalist, my partner in revealing the truth, remained an invaluable friend and ally, and together we continued to investigate new allegations, exposing other networks of corruption, ensuring that the light of truth continued to shine on the darkest corners of power, and our partnership, forged in adversity, became a symbol of the importance of a free press and collaboration between those who seek justice, a testament to the fact that the union of forces, however small, can topple giants and transform reality, whatever the cost. Nigeria, under a new leadership committed to transparency and accountability, began to experience an era of growth and development, with foreign investment returning, the economy strengthening, and people's trust in institutions gradually being restored, and I, Ibrahim Traore, watched this transformation with a mixture of pride and gratitude, knowing that my struggle, my sacrifice, had contributed to a more prosperous and just future for the nation I loved, and for generations to come, a legacy of hope. My scars, physical and emotional, remained as reminders of the battle I fought, of the betrayal I suffered, but also of the resilience of the human spirit, of the strength that emerges from adversity, and each one of them was a story, a lesson, a testimony that the truth, however painful it may be, is the only weapon that can truly liberate, that can heal, that can transform darkness into light. And I carried them with pride, for they were living proof that I had fought, and that I had won. Against all odds, against all dangers. The general, my mentor and confidant, grew older with the wisdom of years and the satisfaction of seeing Nigeria on a new path, and our conversations, once focused on danger, now turned to hope, to the future, to lessons learned, and his presence, his unconditional support, continued to be a beacon in my life, a reminder that loyalty and honor are timeless values, capable of withstanding the most violent storms, and that true strength lies in integrity, in the relentless pursuit of justice, of the truth that sets us free. My life was never the same after Operation Eclipse. I was no longer just a security chief, but a guardian of truth, a herald of justice, and this new identity, forged in adversity and betrayal, gave me a purpose that transcended my individual existence, connecting me to something greater, something that benefited Nigeria, that propelled the nation towards freedom, and this mission, so vital, so essential, became the legacy I wished to leave to the world, a testament to the human capacity to rise again, to fight for what is right, even when the world seems to be falling apart. The story of Ibrahim Traore, the man who exposed a president's secret plan and became a symbol of courage and integrity, has echoed through generations, inspiring leaders, activists and ordinary citizens to never remain silent in the face of injustice, to never bow down to corruption, and to always seek the truth, no matter the cost, because freedom, when won with sacrifice, is an invaluable asset, a treasure that must be defended with all one's strength, so that the light of justice can finally shine eternally upon Nigeria, and upon the world. And so, my journey of pain, betrayal and redemption became a living testament to the unshakable power of truth, an eternal reminder that even in the deepest shadows of power, the light of integrity can emerge, dispelling the darkness and revealing the face of justice, and I, Ibrahim Traore, with a heart at peace and a soul at ease, knew that my struggle had been worth it, that Nigeria was free, and that the future, at last, was secure, protected by the constant vigil of those who, like me, will never be silent in the face of tyranny, who will never give up fighting for truth, for a more just world. My story, the epic of Ibrahim Traore, is not only a tale of betrayal and resistance, but a vibrant testament to the unshakable belief that the truth, no matter how much they try to stifle it with lies and shadows, always finds its way to the light, illuminating the darkest corners of power and revealing the face of those who dare to conspire against their own nation. With every step, every sacrifice, I strengthened the conviction that integrity is the greatest weapon against corruption. For the Nigerian people, my journey became an anthem of hope, a powerful reminder that the voice of justice, when combined with courage and resilience, has the power to topple the mightiest empires, to transform the most profound betrayals into a catalyst for freedom and a dignified future. They saw me not as an untouchable hero, but as a reflection of their own strength and determination, a mirror of their indomitable soul. The scars I bear, both physical and emotional, are more than mere battle scars. they are living proof of the price paid for truth, the indelible seal of a struggle that transcended my own existence, engraving in my soul the importance of freedom and the inestimable value of a nation that, united and strong, will never bow to tyranny. Each one tells a story of resilience, of overcoming, of a spirit that refused to be broken. Nigeria now breathes a purer air, the air of transparency and accountability, and I, Ibrahim Traore, feel the profound joy of having contributed to this redemption, of having been the instrument that tore the veil of lies, allowing the light of justice to flood every corner of the country, building a legacy of integrity that, I trust, will inspire generations to care for democracy and ethics, to never forget that power is to serve, not to oppress. My life, which was once in mortal danger, is now dedicated to spreading awareness, to training new leaders who understand the importance of serving with honor and loyalty, and to ensuring that the story of Operation Eclipse is never forgotten, transforming it into an eternal warning to those who risk treading the paths of corruption and betrayal, a powerful voice that echoes the dangers of unlimited power, and the need for constant monitoring. The legacy of my struggle is a beacon to Nigeria and the world, a vibrant testimony that truth, when courageously revealed, has the power to shake the foundations of any empire, to unmask darkness and pave the way for justice, despite all odds and whatever sacrifices may be required. I believe this with every fiber of my being. Even in the midst of the peace that has been achieved, vigilance is a constant, freedom is a daily achievement, and the memory of betrayal, a perennial reminder that democracy is a garden that needs to be cultivated and protected with care and dedication, so that the weeds of corruption and tyranny never again stifle its flowering, so that Nigeria continues to shine as an example, a hope in an often dark and hopeless world. The story of Ibrahim Traore, which began with the discovery of a secret plan for his ambush, culminated in a silent revolution, a victory of truth over lies, of justice over injustice, and this narrative, so complex and full of twists and turns, is irrefutable proof that the courage of a single individual can light the flame of change in an entire nation, and that the voice of one man, when used for good, can resonate for all eternity. And so my journey of pain, sacrifice and triumph becomes intertwined with Nigeria's own history, an unforgettable chapter in its struggle for freedom and integrity, a testament to the fact that the light of truth, however dim it may seem in the midst of darkness, always finds a way to shine, to dispel the shadows and to guide the way to a more just, more transparent, more prosperous future, for all, without exception, without any doubt. I am Ibrahim Traore, and my voice, which was once a whisper of danger, now rises as a cry of hope, an eternal reminder that truth, justice and freedom are values worth fighting for, no matter the cost, for they are the essence of a nation's soul, the very promise of a better tomorrow, a future where the shadow of betrayal will never dare to rise again, and where the dignity of the people will finally prevail, forever and ever. May Ibrahim Traore's story resonate with each of us, a reminder that vigilance and the relentless pursuit of truth are eternal. If you also believe that knowledge is the greatest tool against darkness, and to continue exploring narratives that challenge power, revealing what few dare to tell, then don't hesitate, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. Together, we will make the truth echo even further, inspiring justice in every corner of the world.